Carissa, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Monica. I'm well, thank you. How are you doing?
Fine. Thank you very much. It's a big pleasure having you today at INCIBE. Thank you very much. And please, we are listening. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Would you like me to speak in English or in Spanish?
Oh, as you want.
Okay. I was told the Spanish, so I'm going to switch.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks very much for inviting me. It's great to be able to talk in Spanish. It's great to be here because cybersecurity is one of the most important subjects in our time, and I am happy to be talking to you because the reputation of Spain on cybersecurity internationally is very good, and that makes me happy. And if Spain tends to undervalue what they do and underestimate themselves. So in this talk, I would like to give you an overview. Very often in cybersecurity subjects, we are overwhelmed by the situation that we tend to focus on the urgent problem that we have in front of us, and we don't think enough long term, where we are going, where this model is taking us. So I'd like to offer a philosophical and ethical overview. Ethics involves asking ourselves what kind of society we want to build. So I'm going to talk for 25 or 30 minutes to leave some time for questions, because I'm interested about your questions. I'm going to talk about privacy, security, and liberty. Whenever there are problems of security and privacy, that has an effect on freedom, and you cannot have freedom without security, or privacy without freedom. So I would like to start with a study and story from World War II to add a bit of perspective to this debate. One of the first things that Nazis did was to go to the register, because that's where data were. So to identify the Jews and locate the Jews, they needed to know where they were. So there's a study. So in the Netherlands, the registers were very good, and in France there was not so much data. So in the Netherlands there was a man called Lenz. He was a pioneer in statistics, and he was trying to build up a system able to do a follow-up of the people from birth to the death. So he invented ID cards. The result is that the Dutch government had a lot of data about their citizens, where they live, where their relatives lived as well. But in contrast, in France, a decision had been taken because of privacy reasons not to gather this data, including those having to do with religion. And the result is that in the Netherlands, the Nazis captured and killed 75% of the Jewish population versus 25% in France. That goes to show how important data is, and how data are very important in the geopolitical sphere. So having data is a risk, but today the risk is even higher for several reasons. We have much more data than ever. For instance, the Stasi, the East Germany police had data of 1/3 of the population, 1/4 or 1/3. But we have data about everyone, and we have more data that Stasi would have imagined to have. Another reason that explains the big risk is that in the past Nazis needed to send troops physically to have their data, but now all you need is a good hacker. So that means that we're much more vulnerable to countries like North Korea or Russia, and they are interested in our data and private data, government data, in order to steal intellectual property or to meddle with the press, etc. Something that I think escapes us often is that technology is not neutral. Any technology has an objective and some assumptions, and especially surveillance technology is not neutral. It always leads to control, and the more surveillance there is, the more control there is, and that leads to a loss of privacy. I can sue it individually, institutionally, and socially. So I'm going to talk on one side about the risk that we are exposing ourselves, where anyone can sell or buy private data, and also how this affects freedom. So we are being exposed to being discriminated because no one prevents any other person to buy data about someone else, data about health or about political activities, etc. And no one is going to find out, because these companies buy this type of data all the time, and the company can always say that there was a better candidate, or there was a candidate that fitted more for that profile. In some cases in Spain, where the identity of someone has been stolen, that person has needed to spend thousands of euros on lawyers. One of the most recent cases in Finland, a psychiatric clinic was hacked, and patients were asked for bitcoins in ransom, otherwise their data was going to be exposed. A company that collects more data than it needs, it's exposing itself. They're exposed to hacking and to leaks. So in terms of society, having so much personal data is like having a clock bomb. Sooner or later, they're going to end in the wrong hands, because private data are very sensitive. They are very difficult to defend, because with the data, you have to defend at all times. If you have an attacker with sufficient resources and time, they are going eventually. They're going to get that data. So it's good to say we are the good guys. We are going to use this data for a good purpose. But the more you hold that data and the more you do transactions with that data, the bigger the risk. A recent example, much more recent than the one of the Nazis, but similar, was that the U.S. government helped the Afghan government helped the U.S. government helped the Afghan government to collect data of the people that were helping them. but now the situation is very different, and those people are exposed. So what we are doing is crazy. The personal data model, the business model revolving around that has an expiry date because it is too toxic. In the past, we have ended similar business models. In the past, we have realized that the price we are paying is our democracy. If you are a man or woman, you're going to see different ads. If you have a Mac computer or a PC, you're going to be charged differently for the same service, and that ends equality. In terms of national security, we're going to end with the economy of data. My hope is that we end it before something terrible happens. But maybe I mean, it is inevitable that we have to wait until it is used for purposes as horrible as the case of the Nazis. So we don't have to be complacent. We don't have to think that everything is all right, because the reality shows otherwise. So internet is going to be insecure if it is structured around gathering data. To make a secure internet, we have to accept that we cannot collect all the data we're collecting. To give you an example of how real this threat is, a couple of years ago, New York Times published an article in which two journalists who described themselves as not good at technology had been able to identify the location of the United States president. By buying a block of data, they located a phone that belonged to an agent of the Secret Service. So they were also able to identify the most important lawyers in the country, key people in the military, important politicians. And if the president of the United States is not secure, none of us is secure. So the alarms are sounding. It is worrying, and we have to listen to them. So what do we do with this data economy? The first thing to do is to build compartments. This idea about connecting everything can be very convenient in the short term, but it doesn't really work long term. It can be useful for ships. As well as ships have different compartments, we need compartments with data. The Internet of Things is going to create an even bigger threat, because hacking a phone is not that easy, but hacking a kettle is really easy, because a kettle or a teapot is not updated, it gets old, and if hackers are able to hack 10% of house appliances in a country, they are able to tear down the electric network. So imagine that you're in lockdown and the electric network goes down for a few days. So compartments are very, very important. We need to stop collecting all that data. It is crazy. We need to think about personal data in terms of toxic data. just like
Es muy barato.
yeah, it's very it's a very useful material because it's durable, but it is very toxic. Everywhere, hundreds of thousands of million people die of cancer because we use asbestos in our infrastructure. And personal data are similar in many respects. They're easy to mine, they're cheap, and they're accessible, but they are very toxic, and they're exposing individuals, institutions, and companies to huge risk. Right now, we have a system where default means opt-out. So if you don't want your data to be collected, you have to say it. So every time when you're browsing, every time you visit a web page, you need to say no. So, but it should be the other way around. So getting your data should be an effort, because with your permission, they can ask you for your data. We need to ban the buy and sale of data. There are things that should not be on the market. We don't sell and buy people, or the result of the football match, or votes. And for the same reasons that we don't sell and buy votes, we shouldn't buy or sell personal data, because they're used in the same way as in the case of Cambridge Analytica. It's not old-style propaganda. No, it's not propaganda that only one person sees. And these ads are so opaque that are difficult to see. So, in the case of Cambridge Analytica, the ads that convince people not to vote, and that clearly accepts. That clearly affects democracy. So there are companies that are doing similar things, and we're not doing enough to stop them. And for those among you who can be a bit skeptical, you have to look at the history. We banned the work of miners. At some point, it was thought to be indispensable. And another example that I give in my book is how we got the ozone layer back. The situation was bad, but some chemicals were banned, and we're recovering the ozone layer.
We need to ban ads and customize content. The advantages are minimum, and this can be achieved through context-based ads, etc. And we need to delete data. Throughout most of history, the normal thing to do was to forget. Forget because our memories are not perfect, because our materials are not perfect. For instance, when paper did not have any acid, it would crumble after a few years. There were floods, there were fires, and the effort to remember was so much that we needed to select very carefully what we wanted to remember. If you were to write everything you want to remember, you can't write everything, so you have to select a minimum portion of reality. And now the economy of remembering and forgetting is totally devoted to the data, and it's upside down. Today we remember as much as possible, and we don't forget anything, because it's easier and cheaper to remember everything than selecting and having to forget certain things. But that is creating risks, internal risk on the one hand. We are undermining equality, also external challenges with rivals such as China and Russia, and it also making us very tough society. It's a society that can never forget. It's a society that can never allow its citizens to change and improve. And in the long run, that also has an influence on freedom, because we are realizing that everything we do is recorded, and we are creating children who don't know what it is to do something without being judged, without being looked at, and without being pictured and framed in a picture that can affect your future perspectives to get a job, for instance. And that is something we should be worried about. And there are many ways to delete data. For instance, we could program our computers so that the default would be for a file to self-destroy after 2 years, just to give you an example. Or Twitter might have a default option that deletes your tweets after 2 years. Keeping data for as long as possible creates our own risks, and what can be the greatest risk that we have to face in the long term. And I would like to end with a reflection about China and a story that reflects what we want to go, where we want to head. China, to most of the world's surprise, has just passed one of the most strict and restrictive laws with regard to privacy. And many people question why China did that. Why do something that cost them $1 trillion to their market? And probably there are many reasons. But one of the reasons, no doubt, is due to cybersecurity and national security, because in China they know far too well that sooner or later all their data will end up in their rivals' hands in the US and Europe, and forcing businesses to collect much less data than they used to is something urgent. It is urgent to start a new alliance with the US, because the US is essential in geopolitics, and insofar as there are no federal laws on the ground, it will be more difficult for us to protect ourselves. And I will end with a story that reflects the risks that we are facing and that should make us think, consider changing the model. Going back to World War II, there are two stories, one from France and another one from Holland, which show more particular examples about this general question. So, of the country with less data being able to save more people. In France, they did not have IBM cards, such as in Holland, which at the end of the day was a way to control people. So when the Nazis came, the French said, we don't know how many Jewish people we have or where they live, so we can't really help us. So the Nazis had to depend on people giving themselves up, or they had to rely on neighbors, etc. So somebody volunteered to do a census that the Nazis didn't have. He compiled the data, but after a few months he would not give those data to the Nazis, and it turned out that he never thought about giving that away. It was one of the strongest people in the resistance. His name was Nekarnil, and somebody, by collecting data, saved the lives of thousands of people. Whereas in Holland there was a resistance cell who wanted to raise data from the registry to save people. They entered the registry office, they set fire to the files, and they had a plan with the firefighters so that they could arrive as late as possible. And unfortunately, they did not succeed. They only managed to destroy 15% of the document, and the Nazis found and killed 70,000 Jewish. The Dutch people found that they had many more data than they thought, and that they did not have this physical time to delete them all, to destroy them all. So this is something that should make us think twice about this issue. Thank you.